The emergency alarm screamed through the halls of the Galactic Coalition Command Center. Red lights flashed on every wall as Admiral Kang Ho ran down the metal corridor. His boots made loud sounds on the floor. He had never seen the base this scared before. "Sir, you need to see this right now," called out Lieutenant Sung-min from the main control room. The young officer's face was white with fear. Kang Ho pushed through the doors and stopped. The huge screen showed something that made his blood turn cold. An entire star system was gone. Not destroyed, not broken apart, just gone. Empty space where billions of lives had been just days before. "How is this possible?" Kang Ho asked in a quiet voice. Dr. Yuna stepped forward from her workstation, was the Coalition's best scientist, but even she looked confused and scared. "Admiral, we have been watching this for 3 days. The Kepler 442 system just disappeared. All 7 planets, the star, everything. Our sensors show nothing but empty space." The room fell silent. 30 years of peace in the galaxy, and now this. Kang Ho had fought in the border wars and seen planets burn, but he had never seen anything like this. "Show me the recording," he said. The screen changed to show the Kepler 442 system from a week ago. It looked normal, bright yellow star, with 7 planets spinning around it. 2 of those planets had cities with millions of people. The next image showed the same area of space yesterday. Nothing. Just black, empty space with a few pieces of space dust floating around. "The strangest part is how it happened," Dr. Yuna said. She pressed some buttons and the screen showed new data. Our deep space sensors picked up some kind of energy wave moving through the system. It touched the outer planets first, then moved toward the star. "What kind of energy?" asked Commander Dong-wook, the Coalition's military chief. "We don't know. It's not like anything we have seen before. The energy doesn't match any known weapon or natural event. It seems to eat matter itself." Engineer Wu Jin, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. "Doctor, I looked at the sensor data. The energy readings are impossible. They show negative mass in some areas. Physics says that can't exist." Dr. Yuna nodded. "That's what scares me most. Whatever did this operates outside our understanding of how the universe works." Admiral Kang Ho walked to the big window that looked out at the stars. In the distance, he could see the Coalition fleet. Thousands of ships from dozens of worlds, all ready to fight. But fight what? How do you fight something that can make entire star systems disappear? "Have there been other attacks?" he asked. 3 more systems have gone dark in the past 2 days, reported Sung-min. The Tau Ceti colonies, the mining stations in the Vega system, and the research outpost at Wolf 359. Same pattern each time. Energy wave, then nothing. The room went quiet again. Everyone knew what this meant. Something was moving through Coalition space, eating everything in its path, and they had no idea how to stop it. "Sir," Dr. Yuna said softly, "I think I know what these things are." All eyes turned to her. She walked to the main screen and brought up a new image. It showed strange, dark shapes moving through space. They looked like living shadows with tentacles reaching out in all directions. "Our long-range scouts found these creatures near the edge of the Andromeda Galaxy 2 years ago. We called them void spawn. We thought they were just rare space animals. We were wrong. The shapes on the screen moved in ways that hurt to watch. They seemed to bend space around them, creating impossible angles and curves. They're not from our dimension," Dr. Yuna continued. "They exist partially in our reality and partially somewhere else. That's why they can do things that seem impossible."
Ow.
"Many are there?" Kang Ho asked. "We don't know.
Ow.
Our scouts only saw a few dozen before they had to run.
Admiral.
These things are smart. They hunt in groups. They plan their attacks." Engineer Wu Jin stepped forward. "Doctor, what do they want?" "Why are they destroying our worlds?" "They feed on consciousness," Dr. Yuna said. "They eat the life force of thinking beings. Every person, every animal, every plant that can think or feel. They consume it all and grow stronger." Commander Dong-wook slammed his fist on the table. "Then we fight them. The Coalition has the strongest military in the galaxy. We can stop these monsters." "With what?" Dr. Yuna asked. Our weapons use energy, and they eat energy. Our shields are made of matter, and they consume matter. We sent 3 battle fleets. To stop them at the Rigel system, the fleets never came back. The weight of her words hit everyone in the room. The Coalition had never faced an enemy like this. An enemy that could not be fought with normal weapons. There has to be a way, Kong-ho said firmly. We can't just watch them eat the galaxy. Dr. Yuna looked at her datapad. Maybe there is. The creatures have one weakness. They exist in multiple dimensions at once. If we could create a prison that works in all dimensions, we might be able to trap them? A prison? Dongwook asked. How do you build a prison for something that can eat stars? We would need to create a pocket dimension, Woojin said, understanding what the doctor meant. Space that exists separate from normal reality. If we could trick them into going inside, we could seal it forever. That's impossible, Dongwook said. We don't have that kind of technology. Actually, we do, Dr. Yuna said with a small smile. The Quantum Research Station at Titan has been working on dimensional manipulation for 5 years. They have already created small pocket spaces for storage. Admiral Kanjo felt hope for the first time in days. How long would it take to build this prison? 6 months? Maybe less if we use every resource the Coalition has, Woojin said. But Admiral, this is not just about building a prison. We need to make the creatures want to go inside. We need bait. What kind of bait? Kong-ho asked. Dr. Yuna's face became serious. They feed on consciousness, the strongest consciousness in the galaxy. We would need to create a psychic beacon so powerful that they can't resist it. You're talking about using people as bait, Dongwook said angrily. Volunteers, Dr. Yuna said quickly. Psychic volunteers who would create the beacon from inside the prison. Once the creatures are trapped, we could evacuate the volunteers through a separate exit. The room fell silent as everyone thought. About the plan, it was dangerous. It was untested. But it was the only hope they had. Do it, Admiral Kong-ho said. Start building the prison. I'll contact the other Coalition leaders. We need to begin now, before these things eat any more of our worlds. As the meeting ended and people rushed to begin their work, Kong-ho looked out at the stars again. Somewhere out there, the Void Spawn were moving closer to the heart of Coalition. Space, they had perhaps 6 months to build the most complex prison in galactic history. The fate of every thinking being in the galaxy depended on it. 5 months had passed since the emergency meeting. In the deep space beyond the outer rim, something amazing was taking shape. Engineer Woojin floated in his spacesuit, watching as the final pieces of the prison were put into place. Status. Report, he said into his helmet radio. Section 7 is complete, came the voice of his assistant engineer, Nari. The quantum barriers are online and stable. Woojin smiled inside his helmet. The prison was beautiful in a terrifying way. It looked like a massive metal ring floating in space, but that was just the outside. The real prison existed inside a pocket dimension that the ring controlled. Dr. Yuna, how are the reality anchors working? He asked. Perfect, her voice came through the radio. The anchors are keeping the pocket dimension stable. Even if the Void Spawn try to break reality inside the prison, they won't be able to escape. The prison had taken every resource the Coalition could spare. Thousands of ships had brought materials from across the galaxy. The best scientists and engineers from 50 worlds had worked day and night to build it, and now it was almost ready. Admiral? Kong-ho construction team, came the Admiral's voice. How much longer do we need? 2 more days, Woojin replied. We're installing the last of the consciousness dampeners now. The consciousness dampeners were Dr. Yuna's idea. The Void Spawn fed on the thoughts and feelings of living beings. The dampeners would flood the prison with a special energy that would make thinking difficult. Any creature trapped inside would become slow and confused, unable to use their full power. Those dampeners worry me, said Dr. Hyjin from the medical ship. What if they affect the volunteers who create the psychic beacon? We've tested them on volunteers, Dr. Yuna said. The dampeners make humans tired and slow, but they don't cause permanent damage. The volunteers can still create the beacon long enough to trap the creatures. Woojin moved to the next section of the prison. Here, massive computers controlled every part of the trap. The prison would run itself once it was activated. No one would need to stay outside to operate it. The artificial intelligence systems are ready, reported computer specialist Dong Su. The AI can monitor the prison for 1,000 years without help. It will watch the void spawn and make sure they stay trapped. What about the exit portal? For the volunteers, asked Commander Dong Woog from the command ship. Ready and tested, Wu Jin said. Once the trap is closed, the volunteers can escape through a separate dimensional door. They'll be safe. But even as he said it, Wu Jin felt worried. The prison was the most complex thing ever built. So many things could go wrong. What if the void spawn were smarter than they thought? What if the prison wasn't strong enough? Contact from the scout ships came a new voice. It was Captain Unicio, leader of the long-range patrol. The void spawn are moving toward the Centauri system. They'll reach it in 3 days. Admiral Kung Ho's voice became urgent. How many ships are in the Centauri system? Evacuation fleet. Reports 2 million civilians still on the planets. They need more time. They don't have more time, Dr. Yuna said sadly. The creatures are moving faster than before. They're getting stronger with each system they consume. Wu Jin felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. 2 million people would die if the prison wasn't ready. But rushing the final steps could doom the entire galaxy. We activate the prison tomorrow night, Admiral Kanjo decided. Ready or not, we can't wait longer. The next day passed in a blur of final preparations. The psychic volunteers arrived on the beacon ship. There were 50 of them, all with strong mental abilities. It would create the psychic signal that would attract the void spawn to the prison. Are you sure about this? Dr. Hyjin asked the volunteer leader, a young woman named Su Ben. Once you're inside the prison, you'll be trapped with the most dangerous creatures in the galaxy. Su Ben nodded calmly. We understand the risk, but if we don't do this, everyone dies. At least this way, we might save the galaxy. The volunteers entered the prison dimension through a special portal. Inside, they found a strange gray world with no sky or ground. It was like being inside a cloud that went on forever. The consciousness dampeners made their thoughts feel heavy, but they could still function. Beacon team in position, Subin reported. Beginning psychic signal now. On the command ship, everyone watched the screens with nervous excitement. Psychic beacon was invisible to normal eyes, but their instruments showed it clearly. A bright pulse of mental energy that reached out across space, calling to the void spawn. Signal is strong and stable, reported the psychic monitoring officer. The creatures should detect it within hours. Dr. Yuna checked her instruments. The prison systems are all green, quantum barriers at full power. Reality anchors locked in place. Consciousness dampeners at maximum. How do we know the creatures will come? Asked Commander Dongwook. The psychic beacon is the strongest consciousness signal in the galaxy. It's like a feast they can't resist. They'll come, and they did. 3 hours later, the long-range sensors detected them. Dark shapes moving through space faster than any ship. They twisted reality around them as they flew, leaving trails of broken space-time. Contact called out the sensor officer. 12 void spawn approaching at incredible speed. They're heading straight for the prison. Admiral Kung Ho stood up. From his command chair, all ships moved to safe distance. If this goes wrong, we don't want to be caught in the trap. The Coalition fleet moved away from the prison, but they kept their sensors focused on the approaching creatures. On the screens, the void spawn looked like living nightmares. They had no solid form, just dark energy that reached out with tentacles. Of shadow. They're beautiful, Dr. Yuna whispered. Terrible, but beautiful. The creatures reached the prison and circled it like sharks around prey. They could sense the psychic beacon inside, but they seemed to know this was a trap. Come on, Wu Jin said quietly. Take the bait. For long minutes, nothing happened. The void spawn circled the prison, reaching out with their tentacles but not entering. Then one of them, larger than the others, suddenly dove into the prison dimension. One is inside, called out the sensor officer. The moment the first creature entered, the others followed. The psychic beacon was too strong to resist. All 12 void spawn rushed into the prison dimension, hungry for the consciousness waiting inside. All targets inside, the sensor officer reported. Activating containment protocols. The prison sealed itself with a sound like reality tearing. The pocket dimension closed off from normal space, trapping the creatures inside forever. The psychic beacon stopped as the volunteers prepared to escape. "It worked," Admiral Kongho said with amazement. "It actually worked." But their celebration was cut short by an alarm from the prison monitoring system. "Sir," the AI reported in a calm voice, detecting unusual energy readings from the prison dimension. One of the objects pulled into the containment field was not a void spawn. "What do you mean?" Dr. Yuna asked. "A small research vessel was caught in the activation field. It appears to contain one human life form." The command center went silent. Someone was trapped inside with the monsters. "Who?" Admiral Kung-ho asked quietly. "Dr. Taeho from the Xenobiology Research Station. His ship was studying the void spawn when the prison activated." Dr. Yuna looked at the prison controls. "Can we get him out?" "Active." "The containment protocols cannot be reversed without releasing the void spawn. The prison is sealed permanently." Admiral Kung-ho felt sick. They had saved the galaxy, but they had doomed an innocent man to die with the monsters they had trapped. "The volunteers got out safely," reported the evacuation team. "All 50 psychic volunteers are on the rescue ships." But Dr. Taeho was still inside, alone with creatures that could devour star systems. The perfect prison had worked exactly as planned. Too well. "May the stars forgive us," Admiral Kongho said quietly as the fleet prepared to leave. The prison floated in space, keeping its terrible secret forever. Dr. Taeho woke up to a world that made no sense. The last thing he remembered was watching the void spawn through his research ship's sensors. He had been taking notes on their movement patterns when suddenly everything went white. Now he was lying on something that felt like ground but looked like gray clouds. Above him was not sky, but more gray clouds that moved in slow circles. Ow. There was light, but he could not see where it came from. The air felt thick and heavy, like trying to breathe underwater. "Where am I?" he said out loud. His voice sounded strange, like it was coming from far away. Taeho sat up slowly. His head felt heavy, and his thoughts moved like thick honey. Looked around and saw his research ship about 50 meters away. It was crashed on its side, but it looked undamaged. Then he saw them. The void spawn were there, about 100 meters away. 12 massive creatures that looked like living darkness with tentacles reaching out in all directions. Something was wrong. They were moving very slowly, like they were underwater or half asleep. Taeho's scientific mind kicked in despite his fear. The creatures should have killed him instantly. They fed on consciousness, and he was definitely conscious. But they seemed to barely notice him. "The consciousness dampeners," he whispered. The prison was designed to make thinking difficult. It was affecting the void spawn, making them slow and confused. But it was affecting him too. He tried to stand up and almost fell over. His legs felt weak and his balance was off. It took effort, like trying to remember something from long ago. But he was still alive, and that was more than anyone had expected. Taeho made his way to his crashed ship. The door was stuck, but he managed to force it open. Inside, most of his equipment was still working. The computer showed that he was inside a pocket dimension, just like the reports had described. "Emergency log, day 1, he said into the recorder. "Dr. Taeho, Xenobiology Research Division. They appear to be trapped inside the void spawn prison. The creatures are here, but seem to be affected by the consciousness dampeners. I am alive, but experiencing severe mental slowdown." He looked through his supplies. Food for maybe 2 weeks, water for 10 days, and basic tools. Not much for surviving in an impossible prison with galaxy-destroying monsters. The next few hours were the hardest of his life. He had to think very carefully about every action. The dampeners made planning difficult, but they also seemed to make him calmer. He should have been terrified, but instead he felt strangely focused. He watched the void spawn through his ship's sensors. They moved in slow, lazy circles, their tentacles reaching out to touch things that weren't there. Sometimes they would get close to each other and make sounds like wind through broken glass. But they never came near him. "They can't sense me properly," he realized. "The dampeners are hiding my consciousness from them." Day 2 brought new discoveries. The gray world around him was not empty. There were structures in the distance, made of the same gray material as the ground. When he walked toward them, they seemed to move away, but when he stopped looking directly at them, they stayed in place. The physics of this place were all wrong. Water flowed upward sometimes. Gravity changed direction without warning. Light came from everywhere and nowhere. But somehow his human brain was starting to understand the patterns. The dimension follows dream logic, he recorded. It's not physical laws, but the way thoughts and emotions work. The structures respond to attention and intention. On day 3, he made his first tool. Using pieces from his ship and some of the strange gray material, he built a simple shelter. The gray material was amazing. It could become hard like metal or soft like cloth just by thinking about what he wanted it to be. The matter here responds to consciousness, he recorded. That's why the void spawn are so powerful in normal space. They can control matter with their thoughts. But here the dampeners make that control weak and slow. Day 4 brought his first real encounter with a void spawn. One of the creatures drifted near his shelter while he was working outside. Up close, it was even more terrifying. It was like looking at a hole in reality shaped like a giant jellyfish. Tejo froze, expecting to die. But the creature just floated past him, its tentacles brushing against his shelter. Where it touched, the gray material rippled like water. The creature seemed curious, but not aggressive. It's like a drugged animal, he whispered. Dangerous, but not focused enough to hunt. Days turned into weeks. Tejo learned to work with the strange physics of the prison. He built better shelters, found ways to purify water from the gray material, and even discovered plants that grew in the impossible soil. Plants that glowed with soft light and provided nutrition. The consciousness dampeners continued to affect him, but in unexpected ways. His thoughts were slower, but clearer. He could focus on problems for hours without getting distracted. His memory became sharper, and he started to notice patterns he had never seen before. Day 23, he recorded. The dampeners are not just slowing my thoughts, they're changing how I think. I can understand this place in ways that normal human consciousness cannot. He began to study the void spawn more closely. They were not just monsters. They had behaviors, patterns, maybe even a kind of culture. They moved in groups, communicating through sounds and changes in their energy patterns. They're not evil, he realized one day. They're just very different. They consume consciousness because that's how they survive. Like how we eat plants and animals. Day 30 brought a breakthrough. One of the smaller void spawn had been staying near his shelter for several days. It seemed to be watching him work. When he moved, it moved. When he stopped, it stopped. Tejo decided to try something dangerous. He took a piece of glowing plant and offered it to the creature. The void spawn's tentacles reached out and touched the plant. For a moment, Tejo felt a connection, a flash of alien thoughts and emotions. The creature was lonely, was confused. It missed something that Tejo could not understand. In that moment, he realized that the consciousness dampeners were not just affecting their ability to hunt. They were affecting their ability to connect with each other. They're isolated, he recorded, cut off from their own kind by the same system that's supposed to contain them. They're as trapped as I am. Day 45 brought another change. Tejo's body was adapting to the prison environment. He could move more easily despite the heavy air. Thus, his thoughts were becoming clearer even with the dampeners. He was learning to work with the strange physics instead of fighting them. He built a workshop where he could study the void spawn more closely. Using his scientific equipment and the responsive gray material, he created sensors that could detect their emotional states. What he found amazed him. The creatures had complex emotional lives. They felt fear, curiosity, sadness, and something that might have been hope. They were not the mindless destroyers that everyone believed. They were intelligent beings trapped in a situation they could not understand. Day 60, he recorded. I think I can communicate with them, not with words, but with emotions and intentions. The prison dimension amplifies thought-based communication. I just need to figure out how to use it safely. As the days passed, Tejo began to change. The constant exposure to the prison's effects was making him more than human. He could sense the void spawn's emotions from a distance. He could shape the gray material with just his thoughts. It was becoming something new. But most importantly, he was no longer afraid. He was beginning to understand that this prison was not just a trap, it was a teacher. And he was learning lessons that no human had ever learned before. The void spawn were not his enemies. They were his fellow prisoners. And maybe, just maybe, they could help each other survive in this impossible place. Outside the prison, the galaxy continued its daily life. Unaware that inside their perfect trap, the impossible was happening. The human was not just surviving with the monsters. He was beginning to understand them, and that understanding would change everything. 3 years had passed since Dr. Tejo was trapped in the prison. He no longer looked like the same man who had accidentally fallen into this impossible place. His hair had turned white, not from age but from the strange energy that filled the dimension. His eyes now glowed with a soft blue light, and he could see things that should have been invisible. Day 1095, he spoke into his recorder. His voice had changed too, becoming deeper and more musical. The adaptation continues. I can now shape the gray material without touching it. The consciousness dampeners no longer slow my thoughts. Instead, they seem to make me think in new ways. Tejo walked through his settlement. Over the years, he had built an entire village using the responsive gray material. There were workshops, gardens, where impossible plants grew, and even a library, where he kept his research notes. It's carved into stone-like tablets. But he was not alone anymore. The void spawn had been changing too. The smaller one that had first approached him, which he called friend, now came to visit him every day. Blue for greeting, yellow for curiosity, red for warning. Is getting smarter, Tejo recorded. The consciousness dampeners affect them differently than they affect me. Instead of making them slow, the dampeners are making them more focused, more aware of themselves as individuals. Edge of his settlement where friend was waiting, the creature was about the size of a small house, its dark body floating a meter above the ground. He had learned that the creatures could understand simple words, though they could not speak them. Friend's tentacles touched the ground and drew symbols in the gray material. The symbols glowed for a moment, then faded. Tejo had been teaching Friend to write. Friend had been teaching him something much more amazing. The creature was showing him memories. When Friend's tentacles touched Tejo's hand, images flowed into his mind. Not words or pictures, but pure experiences. He saw what Friend had seen before the prison. The vast emptiness between galaxies. The cold darkness that went on forever. The desperate hunger for any kind of life or warmth. You were starving, Tejo whispered. Your whole species was dying. More images came. A great civilization that had once existed somewhere far away. Beautiful cities made of crystalline structures that sang in the wind. People who looked like living light, dancing through the air. Then something terrible happened. The stars began to go out one by one. The universe grew cold and empty. You're not from another dimension, Tejo realized. You're from the future, from a time when our universe is dying. Friend's tentacles glowed bright yellow, which meant yes. The void spawn were not invaders. They were refugees. They had found a way to travel back in time to when the universe was still young and full of life. But they could not survive without feeding on consciousness, and that feeding destroyed the very thing they were trying to save. Day 1100, Tejo recorded later, major breakthrough. The void spawn are time travelers from a dying universe. They consume consciousness not because they are evil, but because they need it to survive. They are trying to preserve life, but their method destroys life. It's the ultimate tragedy. This discovery changed everything. Tejo began to work on a new project. The void spawn needed consciousness to survive. Maybe he could find a way to give it to them without destroying the beings who possessed it. He studied the consciousness dampeners that filled the prison. These devices were designed to suppress conscious thought. But what if they could be modified? What if instead of suppressing consciousness, they could copy it? Day 1200, he recorded, Well, I think I can modify the prison systems. The dampeners work by reading and interfering with conscious thought. If I change their programming, they might be able to create copies of consciousness instead of suppressing it. It was dangerous work. The prison systems were incredibly complex, and one mistake could destroy everything. But Taeho had advantages that the original builders never had. He understood the void spawn now. He knew what they really needed. More importantly, his own mind had been changed by years in the prison. He could think in ways that normal humans could not. He worked for months, carefully modifying small sections of the prison's systems. Friend and the other void spawn helped him, using their natural ability to manipulate energy. Together, they created something new. Day 1300, he recorded. First test successful. I have created a consciousness duplicator. It can make a perfect copy of a person's thoughts and memories without harming the original. The copy contains all the life energy that the void spawn need to survive. The test had been simple. He had copied his own consciousness and fed the copy to one of the smaller void spawn. The creature had been satisfied without Taeho losing anything. He was still himself, but the void spawn no longer felt hungry. But this was just the beginning. If his theory was correct, the prison could be turned into something much more important than a trap. It could become a bridge between two dying civilizations. 1400, he recorded. The other void spawn are learning to communicate. I have taught them basic symbols and concepts. They are sharing their memories with me, and I am beginning to understand their true nature. The creatures were not just refugees, they were the last survivors of countless civilizations. When their universe began to die, different species had found different ways to try to survive. Some had built great machines to preserve their memories. Others had tried to transfer their consciousness into artificial bodies. But only the ancestors of the void spawn had found a way to travel through time itself, to carry the memories. Of 1 trillion beings, Taeho realized, every person who ever lived in their universe is still alive inside them. They are not just trying to save themselves. They are trying to save everyone who ever existed. This knowledge filled Taeho with a strange mix of sadness and hope. The void spawn were not monsters. They were heroes who had been forced to become destroyers. They had sacrificed their own humanity to preserve the memory of their universe. 1500, he recorded. I understand now why I am here. This was not an accident. The universe brought me here to solve this problem. The prison was never meant to be a trap. It was meant to be a laboratory. He looked around at his settlement, which had grown into a small city. The void spawn moved freely through it now. No longer dangerous, but still alien. Yet they had built their own structures using materials that existed in dimensions he could barely perceive. Together, a place where the living and the dead, the present and the future, could coexist. A place where consciousness could be preserved without destroying the beings who possessed it. Day 1600, he recorded. I am ready to begin. The next phase. I am going to modify the prison's communication systems. It's time to contact the outside universe. It's time to tell them what we have learned. But as he worked on the communication array, Taeho wondered if the galaxy would be ready for what he had to tell them. Would they understand that their greatest enemies were actually their greatest teachers? He looked at Friend, who was helping him adjust the quantum resonators. The creature's tentacles glowed with complex patterns that Taeho now recognized as poetry. Beautiful alien poetry about loss and hope and the endless cycle of life and death. We are going to change everything, he told Friend. The universe will never be the same. Friend's tentacles glowed bright yellow. Yes, change was coming. And it would be wonderful and terrible and necessary all at once. The prison that was meant to contain. Now it was time to share that possibility with the rest of the galaxy, whether they wanted it or not. 5 years after his accidental imprisonment, Dr. Taeho stood before the massive control center he had built in the heart of the prison dimension. The structure rose like a crystal mountain from the gray ground, its walls made from a mixture of his ship's technology and the living materials that the void spawn had taught him to grow. Day 1825, he spoke into his recorder. His voice now carried harmonics that seemed to come from multiple dimensions at once. Today we begin the final phase. Today we contact the outside universe. Around him, all 12 void spawn floated in a careful circle. They had learned to work together in ways that amazed him. Friend, his first contact, had become something like a leader among them. The others had names now too. Though their names were patterns of light and sound that human words could not capture, Tejo called them by simple names: wisdom, hope, memory, dream, song, dance, light, shadow, peace, storm, joy, and sorrow. One carried the preserved consciousness of billions of beings from their dying future universe. Are you ready? He asked them in the musical language they had taught him. Their tentacles glowed in harmony, creating a symphony of colored light. That meant, yes, we are ready to try. The plan was incredibly dangerous. Tejo would use the prison's communication systems to send a message to the coalition. But the message would not be just words. It would be a direct consciousness transfer, carrying his memories and experiences. To whoever received it. If this works, he told his companions, the people outside will understand what we have learned. They will see that you are not monsters, but teachers. And if it does not work, asked Wisdom, its tentacles forming the question in patterns of blue and silver light. Then we continue our work here, Tejo replied. We have eternity to find another way. But he hoped it would not take eternity. In the past year, strange readings from the prison's sensors had shown him something disturbing. The void spawn were not the only time travelers in the universe. More were coming, thousands of them, fleeing from an even more distant future where Tejo's universe had also begun to die. The current group of void spawn represented just the first wave. If the coalition did not learn to work with them, the next wave would be much larger and much more desperate. And desperate creatures did desperate things. Tejo placed his hands on the control interface he had built. It was part machine, part living organism, part pure thought made solid. The consciousness dampeners that had once been used to suppress. The void spawn now served as amplifiers, boosting his mental abilities far beyond normal human limits. Beginning transmission, he announced. The first step was to break through the prison's barriers. The quantum locks that held the dimensions separate from normal space were incredibly strong. But Tejo had learned something. The prison's builders never knew. The barriers were not just walls, they were filters. And like all filters, they could be adjusted. He reached out with his enhanced consciousness, feeling for the resonance frequencies that controlled the quantum locks. The void spawn joined their mental energy to his, their collective consciousness providing the power he needed. Frequency match achieved, he said, opening communication channel. Far outside the prison, in the coalition monitoring station that watched over the dimensional trap, alarms began to sound. Sir, called technician Kyung Ho to his supervisor, we're getting strange readings from the prison. Supervisor Ji-hai looked at the displays with concern. What kind of readings? Some kind of signal coming from inside the dimension. It's not possible. Nothing should be able to communicate through the quantum barriers. But even as they watched, the impossible signal grew stronger. It was not just data. It was something alive, something intelligent. Reaching out from inside their perfect trap, inside the prison, Tejo felt the connection establish itself. For the first time in 5 years, his consciousness touched minds that existed in normal space-time. The contact was overwhelming. He could feel the fear and confusion of the coalition technicians. Easy, he whispered to himself. Don't scare them away. He began the transmission carefully, sending simple concepts first. Numbers. Basic mathematical equations. Universal truths that any intelligent species would recognize. Slowly, he felt the people on the other side begin to understand that something was trying to communicate. This is Dr. Tejo. He finally sent in words they could understand. Am alive inside the prison. I have urgent information about the void spawn. Please respond. The reaction on the monitoring station was immediate chaos. Get Admiral Kong Ho, Ji-hai ordered. Get him now. Took 3 hours for the Admiral to arrive. 3 hours during which Tejo maintained the connection, sending careful messages to prove his identity. He told them things only the real Dr. Tejo could know. Details from his research, personal memories, scientific theories he had never published. Finally, Admiral Kung Ho's voice came through the communication link. Dr. Taeho, this is Admiral Kung Ho. If this is really you, tell me something only you would know about our last meeting. Taeho smiled. You asked me if I thought we were doing the right thing. I said that sometimes the right thing and the necessary thing are not the same. You said you hoped history would judge us kindly. There was a long silence. Then it's really you. How is this possible? How are you still alive? Admiral, I have been studying the Void Spawn for 5 years. Everything we thought we knew about them was wrong. They are not monsters. They are refugees from a dying future, carrying the preserved consciousness of countless civilizations. That's impossible, came Dr. Yuna's voice. They destroyed entire star systems because they were starving, Taeho replied. Imagine if you had not eaten for 1,000 years and suddenly you smelled food. Could you stop yourself from eating, even if the food was intelligent? He began to share his memories through the connection. Images of his first contact with friend. The slow process of learning to communicate. The revelation of what the Void Spawn really were. They can travel through time, he explained. They come from our universe's future, billions of years from. Now when all the stars have died, they found a way to come back to when life still existed. But they can only survive by feeding on consciousness. So they destroy civilizations to live. Admiral Kung Ho asked. They did, but they don't have. 2. I have found another way. Taeho showed them his consciousness duplication technology. He demonstrated how it could create perfect copies of thought and memory without harming the original mind. He explained how the Void Spawn could feed on these copies instead of destroying living beings. The prison can be converted, he said. Instead of a trap, it can become a sanctuary. A place where the living and the preserved consciousness can coexist. A bridge between our time and their time. The silence that followed was long and heavy. Even if what you say is true, Dr. Yuna finally said, how can we trust them? How do we know they won't just pretend to cooperate and then betray us? Taeho had expected this question. So I am going to show you what they showed me. I am going to share their memories with you. You will see their history, their suffering, their desperate hope for survival. You will understand that they are not our enemies. That's too dangerous, Admiral, Kung Ho said. We can't risk, Admiral, Taeho interrupted gently. In 1 year, maybe 2, the next wave will arrive. Thousands of Void Spawn, fleeing from an even more distant future. They will be hungrier, more desperate, and much harder to stop. Our choice is simple. Learn to work with the ones we have now, or face destruction when the others arrive. Through the connection, he could feel the weight of decisions settling on the coalition leaders. They were being asked to trust their greatest enemies, to believe that salvation could come from the very creatures they feared most. There is something else, Taeho added quietly. The Void Spawn have shown me visions of what happens to our universe if we don't find a solution. The cycle continues. We become like them. Desperate refugees fleeing through time, destroying other civilizations to survive. Unless we break the cycle here and now. He felt friend's tentacles touch his shoulder in support. The great creature had been listening to the entire conversation, understanding more than the people outside could imagine. I know it's hard to believe, Taeho said. But I am not the same person who was accidentally trapped here 5 years ago. I have become something new. A bridge. Between human and Void Spawn consciousness. And I am telling you that cooperation is not just possible, it is necessary for the survival of all conscious life in the universe. The connection held steady as the coalition leaders debated among themselves. Taeho could feel their fear, their uncertainty, their desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, there was another way forward. Finally, Admiral Kung Ho spoke again. Dr. Taeho, what exactly are you asking us to do? Taeho smiled, his glowing eyes reflecting the tentacle lights of his alien companions. Open the prison, Admiral. Come inside and see what we have built. Let us show you the future, not the one where everything dies, but the one where everything lives. The greatest decision in galactic history hung in the balance, waiting for an answer that would determine the fate of countless civilizations yet to be born. 6 months after Dr. Tejo's first contact with the outside universe, a coalition fleet approached the prison dimension. Admiral Kong Ho stood on the bridge of his command ship, watching the ring of metal that had once been their greatest achievement. Now it looked different to him, less like a trap and more like a doorway. "Sir," called out Communications Officer Minsu. "Dr. Tejo is requesting permission to open the prison barriers." Kong Ho took a deep breath. The past 6 months had been the hardest of his career. Countless meetings, debates, and arguments with coalition leaders. Some wanted to destroy the prison and everything inside it. Others believed Tejo's incredible story. The decision had finally been made just 1 week ago. "Grant permission," Konjo said. "Open the barriers." Dr. Yuna stood beside him, her face pale with worry. "Admiral, are you sure about this?" "We're wrong about the void spawn." "Then we die," Kong Ho said simply. "But if we're right, we save not just our universe, but all universes that come after it." The prison's quantum barriers began to fade. For the first time in over 5 years, the pocket dimension was connecting to normal space. On the view screen, the gray emptiness inside the prison began to clear, revealing something that made everyone gasp. It was beautiful. Where once there had been empty gray space, now there was a city that seemed to be made of light and song. Tall spires reached up toward impossible skies, their surfaces shifting between solid matter and pure energy. Gardens of crystalline plants grew in patterns that hurt to look at, but felt wonderful to experience. And moving through it all were the void spawn, no longer looking like monsters, but like guardians of something precious and strange. "My God," whispered Dr. Yuna. "What have they built?" Dr. Tejo's voice came through the communication system, but now it carried harmonics that seemed to come from multiple dimensions. "Welcome to the sanctuary," he said. "Welcome to the future." A small ship detached from the city and approached the coalition fleet. It was not built from any materials they recognized. It seemed to be grown rather than constructed, its surface flowing like water, but holding its shape like metal. "That's Tejo's ship," reported the sensor officer, "but the life signs are strange. I'm reading one human signature, but it's mixed with something else." The ship docked with the command vessel. Admiral Kong Ho, Dr. Yuna, and a small team of scientists waited in the docking bay as the airlock opened. The man who stepped out was Dr. Tejo, but he was changed beyond recognition. His hair was white as starlight, his eyes glowed with soft blue fire, and his skin seemed to shimmer with patterns of light that moved beneath the surface. When he walked, reality seemed to bend slightly around him, but he smiled the same warm smile they remembered. "Hello, old friends," he said in a voice that carried the music of alien poetry. "Thank you for coming." Dr. Yuna stepped forward cautiously. "Tejo, is it really you?" "I am still me," he said gently, "but I am also more than I was. A prison changed me, helped me become something that could exist in both your world and theirs." Behind him, a void spawn emerged from the ship. But instead of the terrifying monster they expected, they saw something that looked almost graceful. Its tentacles moved in patterns that seemed like dance, and lights flowed across its surface in colors that had no names. "This is friend Tejo," said my first teacher and closest companion. The creature's tentacles glowed in patterns of blue and gold. Somehow, without words, everyone in the docking bay understood that it was greeting them peacefully. "How is this possible?" Admiral Kong Ho asked. "The prison was designed to contain monsters," Tejo explained. "But what it actually did was create a space where different forms of consciousness could learn to understand each other. The void spawn are not monsters, Admiral, they are children." "Children?" Dr. Yuna asked in confusion. Friend's tentacles created new patterns, and suddenly images filled everyone's minds. Not painful or invasive, but gentle as a shared dream. They saw the truth of what the void spawn really were. They were the last survivors of countless dying civilizations. But they were also the youngest members of their species. The adult void spawn had sacrificed themselves long ago, using their life energy to send these children back through time. The monsters that had destroyed star systems were actually orphans. Confused and frightened, trying to survive in a universe they did not understand. They were eating civilizations because they didn't know any other way to live, Tejo said. But now they do. Consciousness duplication technology allows them to feed without destroying. They can preserve the memories and experiences of the living without taking their lives. Show us, Admiral Kong Ho said. Te-Ho led them back to his ship and through a portal that opened into the prison dimension. The Coalition team found themselves walking through the impossible city, surrounded by wonders that defied explanation. They saw gardens where the preserved consciousness of extinct species lived as living light, libraries that contained the complete history of civilizations that had died billions of years in the future, workshops where human and void spawn consciousness worked together to create technologies that could save dying universes. This is what we have built, Tejo said as they walked through a plaza where fountains of liquid starlight danced in the air. A place where the dead can live, where the future can speak to the past, where consciousness itself can be preserved forever. Dr. Yuna stopped before a shimmering wall covered in symbols that seemed to move and change. What is this? Archive friend answered, its thoughts translating directly into words they could understand. Every being that has ever lived in our universe is here. Their memories, their dreams, their hopes, we saved them all. The weight of that statement hit them like a physical blow. Every person who had ever existed in a universe billions of years in the future was alive here, preserved in crystalline memory matrices that pulsed with soft light. But this is just the beginning, Tejo said. With your help, we can do so. Much more. The next wave of void spawn will arrive in less than a year. But instead of fighting them, we can teach them. We can show them what we have learned here. They walked to the center of the city where a great crystal tower reached up through multiple dimensions. Inside the tower, hundreds of void spawn worked, alongside preserved human consciousness, building something that defied comprehension. What are they making? Admiral Kung Ho asked. A bridge, Tejo said. Not just between our time and theirs, but between all times. A way for consciousness to travel freely through the universe, sharing knowledge and experience across billions of years. The implications were staggering. If this worked, it would mean the end of death as they knew it. Every mind that had ever existed could be preserved and connected, creating a vast network of consciousness that spanned all of time and space. The universe doesn't have to die, friend said, its lights pulsing with hope. Consciousness doesn't have to end, which we can save. Everyone who has ever lived or ever will live. Dr. Yuna looked around at the impossible city, at the void spawn working peacefully beside human consciousness, at the technologies that could reshape reality itself. How do we know this will work? We don't, Tejo admitted. We know. What happens if we don't try? The cycle of destruction continues. Universe after universe falls into darkness, and consciousness dies with them. Admiral Kung Ho was quiet for a long time, processing everything he had seen. Finally, he spoke. What do you need from us? Open the barriers completely, Tejo said. Let the prison become what it was always meant to be. Not a cage, but a sanctuary, okay? A place where beings from all times can come to learn and grow and work together. And when the next wave arrives, we welcome them, friend said. We show them that there is another way. Teach them that they don't have to be destroyers to survive. The Coalition team spent 3 more days in the sanctuary, learning about the technologies and philosophies that Tejo and the Void Spawn had developed. They met preserved consciousnesses from civilizations that had died before their own sun was born. They watched as matter and energy were shaped by pure thought into forms of beauty that made them weep. When they finally returned to their ships, they carried with them more than just knowledge. They carried hope. Fleet Command, Admiral Kong Ho said into his communicator. This is Admiral Kong Ho. The prison barriers are to be permanently opened. The Void Spawn are not our enemies. They are our teachers. As the Coalition fleet moved to secure the area around the sanctuary, Tejo stood in his crystal tower, watching the stars. Friend floated beside him, its tentacles creating patterns of light that spoke of gratitude and joy. Do you think they will understand? Friend asked. Some will, Tejo said. Others will be afraid, but that's okay. Understanding takes time. In the distance, the sensors showed new contacts approaching. The second wave of void spawn, just as he had predicted. But this time, instead of weapons, the Coalition fleet carried messages of welcome and hope. The prison that had been built to contain monsters had become the birthplace of a new kind of existence, a place where the living and the dead, the present and the future, could work together to ensure that consciousness itself would never die. The liberation was complete, not just of the void spawn, but of everyone who had ever feared death, ever worried that their thoughts and dreams would be lost forever. In the sanctuary, all consciousness was eternal. And in the depths of space, more refugees from dying futures detected the beacon of hope and turned their course toward the impossible city, where death had been defeated and time itself had been tamed. The universe would never be the same, and that was exactly what it needed.